Well, good evening, everybody, and welcome to this, the new season of English Heritage Members Lectures. This is the series that takes you right to the heart of England's heritage. My name is Matt Thompson. I'm the Curatorial Director at English Heritage, and I'm going to be your host for this evening. And in tonight's lecture, we're heading to Wroxeter, Roman city, in Shropshire, to uncover its curious connections with the continent. Now, although today Wroxeter is just a small village, it was once one of the biggest and one of the most important towns in Roman Britain. It's a local site for me and one that I hold particularly dear, even more so since it's reopened with newly revamped museum with many hundreds of objects on display. Which also gives me a neat segue to mention this year's 1 million and more appeal, which is all about raising money to help us curate the incredible range of historic objects in our collection. If you want to find out more, please check out our website. It's right there on the homepage. So Cameron Moffat will be our guide to this wonderful world of Wroxeter, and in particular to those fascinating links that the city had with Roman Gaul. Cameron is a curator of the archaeological collections that we hold at English Heritage, and she has a particular interest in the daily life of Romans in Britain. She's recently published articles on things as diverse as mead, magic, and kitchen paraphernalia, which sounds like a particularly interesting recipe for a raucous Roman house party. Now, before I hand you over to Cameron, you can send us your questions by popping a message on the right-hand side of your screen. We'll try to get to as many of those questions as we can towards the end of the lecture. Also, during the lecture, a donation button should pop up on your screen. As a member, you already do so much to support us and help us in the important work that we do. But if you're able to support us just that little bit more, please consider making a donation. Every little bit helps us. And as ever, please bear with us if there's any technical issues. And if sound is a particular problem, after the lecture, you'll be able to watch the whole lecture and many of the others in the members area of our website with subtitles. Thank you. And with that, I'll hand over to Cameron.
Good evening, everyone. In Britain, pre-Roman Iron Age continental influences are well demonstrated in the south and east in the form of material culture, traded goods, usually luxury goods. This lecture is about how the system of roads established by the Roman army facilitated the transmission of those influences deep into the interior of Britain to zones that had no past history of contact with Rome. Watling Street was one of the earliest major roads established by the invading Roman army soon after 43 AD, and you see it going diagonally across the picture on the left. It stitched together various existing prehistoric trackways and upgraded the resulting road into something suitable for the army's requirements. It has a number of urban places along its length, which are indicated here. Many of those in the southeast had pre-Roman origins, but as we move further north and west, more of these were new foundations, including Wroxeter. Wroxeter, latterly the fourth largest town in Roman Britain, was the biggest urban settlement in the west of Britain in the Roman period. Its origins lie in the legionary fortress established there in the late 50s AD. You can clearly see that it forms part of the border between lowland Britain and unconquered Wales. And it was the major base from which the conquest of Wales and Anglesey and places to the north on the west coast were launched. And on the map on the left, it is 2/3 of the way up along the Welsh border, a very large black dot. By the late 80s, the Legion had moved on to Chester, and the military buildings at Wroxeter were leveled and the site handed over to the local Cornovii tribe to be developed into their civitas capital under the guidance of Roman advisors. The main episode of construction of the civic centre was from the 120s to about 150 AD, and this had the usual Roman facilities, a forum, public baths, markets, and temples. The English Heritage Monument is the Baths Basilica, which you see here on the slide on the left, containing the massive bathing complex. The Baths Basilica, the big white stripe on the left, the point of entry where bathers exercised before entering the baths, turning right at the top into the bath suite, which offered a number of different experiences, such as a steam bath, a hot dry room, massages. And on the right here, you see the exposed hypocaust, the underfloor heating system below the main bath. There was also an outdoor plunge pool, which was not popular as it was rapidly infilled. The complex had an integral macellum, a marketplace, bottom right, and a tavern and a public latrine. Opposite it on Watling Street, which you can see the tarmacked Watling Street left to right, was the Forum, which is now under a recreated townhouse, which was based on a building seen south of the Forum in excavations of the early 20th century. It has been a busy couple of years for Wroxeter. The site was recently redisplayed, as Matt has told you, including a complete revamp of the museum, which reopened in spring 2023, since when we've had people visiting in far greater numbers than we'd actually even hoped for, an indication of the success of the interpretation project. Many of the objects on display are new to the museum, and we've made the content as accessible to the widest range of visitors as possible by building in content for visitors of all kinds. You see of the new museum on the right, and then some of the really exciting-looking objects on the left and in the middle there. Roman sites are well known for producing vast numbers of finds. The collection for Wroxeter is the largest by volume of all the more than 400 sites we care for. Only a fraction of it can be displayed, and the remainder is kept in secure storage as a resource for research. We have a number of stores throughout England. The collections for the West Midlands are held at Rest Park, Bedfordshire, seen here on the left. And on the right, you see this anonymous storage unit, which is round the back of Rest Park in the stable yard area, which was converted into a collection store a number of years ago. We do occasional public stores tours at Rest. Here you see a large architectural collection stored there on the occasion of a public store visit. We also undertake background documentation work on the collections. They're here on the right, and in the middle, a recent, rather nasty task sorting tons of animal bone from Wroxeter into numerical order. And we also have a smaller, secure store in the building with environmental controls where paper archives and smaller, more delicate and more valuable items are kept, like these two protective amulets from Wroxeter, one in the shape of a vulva and the other incorporating a crescent moon and a double-headed snake, very potent symbols to the Romans. The vast hinterland of Wroxeter is owned partly by English Heritage and partly by the National Trust's Addingham estate. And last year, the National Trust commissioned a large-scale geophysical survey of their own estate. This survey produced evidence of two previously unknown villas of 2nd century date just outside the town boundaries of Wroxeter. And you see their reconstruction drawing on the right. Very lovely drawing. Prior to this work, very few villas were known in the area surrounding Wroxeter. And making it a bumper year for research into Wroxeter, research excavations were undertaken close to the Civic Centre by a team of expert excavators working with students from the University of Cardiff. And they encountered many stone-built structures, including a probable shrine tower, which you see top right, which would have housed a statue of a deity that you could call in and consult with, as well as exposing a probable townhouse, which includes a mosaic floor, which was probably in the townhouse's dining room, which you see in the center there, lovely sort of naive piece of artwork. My subject this evening is based on yet another piece of current research, which was triggered by the decanting of the old and very dated museum prior to the construction of the new one. One case in particular, on the theme of markets, which you see on the right there, contained an unusually large number of complete ceramic vessels. And as we emptied the cases and packed them into boxes, my question was this: why do we have so many complete vessels? The large group of complete vessels, a total of 60 between those on display and those in store, were all from a single excavation, that of Jocelyn Plunkett Bush-Fox, in an excavation undertaken between 1912 and 1914. And the site that he excavated is indicated on the map on the left by a red line. And on the right, you see Bush-Fox himself being charming to visitors to his excavation on a public open day. And I particularly like his boater. Bush-Fox excavated a run of mainly residential and retail properties facing onto Watling Street, constructed in Insula 8, an insula being a Roman city block, in what was the heart of the central business district at Wroxeter. The earliest buildings dating from about 100 to 120 AD, after the demolition of the fortress, of which only the street grid was retained. The Bush-Fox site revealed a run of what are called strip houses, long, narrow buildings which had retail space and workshops on the main street and accommodation in rooms at the rear. There was also a typical Romano-Celtic temple in the center of the run of buildings, which you can see because you can see the podium that the center of the temple sat on. This was dedicated to Venus, and to the north of this, another 3 strip buildings were consolidated about 130 to 150 AD into a sprawling townhouse with its own bath suite. Behind these was a large enclosure demolished fairly early on in the sequence. These buildings were going up while the civic center was under construction between 100 and 150 AD, and this row of buildings would have presented a typical provincial Roman facade, the kind you see in these drawings done for the back walls of the new museum redisplay. And each of those buildings is actually based on a building for which there is archaeological evidence. And we see the same kind of evidence for this specific type of town centre development at Verulamium, St Albans, also situated on Watling Street, where another run of these strip buildings was seen in excavation, also associated with manufacturing and retail activities. These buildings also faced onto Watling Street and are slotted in between the Forum and the theatre, and so right in the heart of the city. Here, also, there were smaller strip houses next door to a much larger property, which was interpreted by the excavator as belonging to the landlord of the smaller properties. And you see an enlargement in the inset there with the red line, showing these strip buildings right in the heart of the city. Strip houses often have evidence for manufacturing activities, and at Wroxeter, melon beads like these were being made in at least one of the furnaces at the end of the site. These were hugely popular and were often used to decorate horse harnesses rather than strung as necklaces for personal adornment. So let's look more closely at the Bush-Fox site. We see the earliest evidence of development in the southern section of Insula 8 on your left. It was open ground with wells and furnaces used in metalworking and bead production, immediately followed by the building of strip housing, presumably accommodation for the artisans working there. Many pits were seen behind the houses in the gardens, some of which contained a single complete vessel of a simple type. 2 examples of the simple locally made bowls that were found in the pits behind the strip houses. In this period, the burying of complete vessels in a context that isn't a burial is a domestic ritual that came to Britain from Belgic tribes of northern Gaul. It is seen much earlier in southeastern Britain, where their contacts with Romanized Gaul began much earlier. It seems very likely that some at least of these vessels would have contained offerings such as food and drink when buried, either sustenance for or giving thanks to the deities. And the location and date of the buried vessels, contemporary with the strip houses, suggest that they may also have served as foundation deposits, each marking the construction of a new home. In contrast to the artisan strip houses, numbers 1 to 3, within the Site 4 building, to the right of them, which is adjacent to and possibly related to the temple, there were many complete pots, mostly jars for drinking from, which had been buried within the footprint of the building, in contrast to the pits buried outside the back of the other houses. Some were in pits sealed below a floor, and others were incorporated into the floor makeup during its construction. Pots buried under floors are thought to be offerings to the household gods called the Lares, who were believed to live below the floor of a house. Far to the west of all the buildings was an outlier pit, Pit 50, which contained the sherds of between 10 and 12 of these very large storage jars that you see on the left, and a pair of identical butt beakers in the Gallo-Belgic style, and one of these is on the right. This may be the earliest of the pits with buried pots in this insula, and could be a foundation deposit in recognition of the commencement of construction work in this insula. The northern section of the Bushfox site tells a different story to the southern one. So this is the run of buildings on the right of that. The Site 5 temple had no pits containing complete pots, but instead a completely traditional Roman foundation deposit was seen there. A jar containing the bones of sacrificed sheep buried below a cornerstone. The Site 6 townhouse on the right was composed of 3 strip houses, amalgamated and then extended between about 130 and 150 AD. There were a few pits with buried pots here relating to the early strip houses, but the more interesting pits with pots are contemporary with the townhouse and are found at the back of it. One pit contained what is clearly a votive deposit of small vessels of religious use. 5 of these miniature vases used to display offerings to the gods such as flowers and foodstuffs, together with a small perfume bottle. The gods liked perfume. As there is no temple here, possibly these relate to a small private shrine in the garden of the townhouse. Not far from this was a pit which contained 2 Samian bowls. Samian is a red fineware imported from Gaul. Both bowls were decorated, but one from the premier Samian workshops of the period, Libertus and Butrio, is decorated with erotic images which include a male-male couple in addition to male and female pairs. This is likely to have been a special commission, as the images that appear on it are very unusual. This is a particularly good example of the cosmopolitan tastes of newcomers relocating from Gaul to Wroxeter to take advantage of new markets and business opportunities, which I suspect is the background to this bowl and to this townhouse right in the center of the city. Another strand to the different rituals seen at Wroxeter is the depositing of complete pots in wells, the significances of which are different to the burying of pots in pits behind houses. On the left, we see a very early jar with a narrow neck deposited at the bottom of the earliest well found on the Bushfox site. This is a recognized tradition in which the commencement of a new well is marked in the hope that it will be productive and long-lived. These 2 other jars from the end of Wroxeter's life in the early 5th century were deposited in 2 different wells, and both of these deposits mark the end of the existence of Roman Wroxeter, commemorations and a farewell at the same time. The main well in the courtyard of the Site 6 townhouse did not contain complete pots, but instead had been filled with large numbers of complete leg bones and antlers from red deer, as well as skulls of wild and domesticated animals. All of these deposition events have parallels at other Romano-British sites. These are recognized termination rituals in Roman Britain. The ritual burying of specific forms of ceramic vessels, almost all related to eating, drinking, and pouring liquids, is typical of people of pre-Roman Belgic origins. This tradition is usually seen and recognized in burial rites. This slide shows the contents of a high-status burial dating to about 85 to 95 AD in Winchester, an area where Belgic people had settled in the Iron Age. What was not recognized until relatively recently were the domestic rituals involving depositing pots in pits. Firstly, as they often appear as simply a large number of sherds, the weight of the soil above having fractured the pots through time, but also because archaeologists often failed to understand that the remains of an entire vessel found together had significance in antiquity and was not simply a piece of random good luck for them. One site that has played a key part in the wider recognition of this domestic ritual is Silchester, another site in the southeast, and with pre-conquest Roman connections. More than 20 years ago, Michael Fulford of the University of Reading looked at the very large collection of complete but unprovenanced vessels from Silchester that derive from excavations of the late 19th and early 20th centuries. And his conclusive answer to the question of why there were so many of them was pervasive ritual. He has also considered the meaning of the many complete pots there that have had holes deliberately drilled in them, which you can see in the slide on the left, something we also have many of at Wroxeter. And again, this is most likely to be a matter of ritual. Objects being offered to the gods need to be changed in order to be useful to them. Meat must be burned, objects must be altered. These material things need to be transformed to another form of being for the gods. Other than the pits with special deposits, can we see more evidence of the influence of people from Gaul at Wroxeter? We certainly can in the architecture. Here are two very attractive new reconstruction drawings that were part of the redisplay at the site at Wroxeter. And that is the forum on the right. Here we see fragments of a Jupiter column, which probably stood in front of the main temple, which has not been excavated. English heritage holds the figured fragments. On the left, you see the war horse and the rider's knee, while Shropshire Museums has sections of the massive columns, which you see in the center because they are on display in their museum. These statues relating to the worship of the principal Roman god were extremely popular in Romanized northeast Gaul, and they depict a cavalryman riding down what is usually a giant or a barbarian. And there is a reconstruction from somewhere in Germany on the right, and up on the top you can just about see the cavalryman riding down some monster of some kind. There is also from Wroxeter a triple-headed Mercury. Mercury, the god of travel and commerce, who was also hugely popular in Gaul, particularly in the tribal area of the Belgae, centered on Rheims. And here are two examples from Gaul in the middle. The Wroxeter example on the left is probably from the top of a column located at a major crossroads, or possibly in the forum, where they were usually situated. We also have a head of Hercules on the right with his lion skin cape over his head and part of his face. It's been broken away. And he is another very popular classical deity, here depicted in a provincial style similar to the triple-headed Mercury. The contribution of Gallic stonemasons to the civilian town of Wroxeter in the first half of the century is completely unsurprising. It relates to a pattern of colonization seen across the Mediterranean over the previous centuries, which demonstrates just how conquest and commerce are intertwined. The image on the left shows the fine spots of very early Roman amphorae of imported wine, and you can see it traveling along the Mediterranean coast of Gaul, from where most of it heads up the many navigable rivers of Gaul, some of it making its way across the Channel to the settlements in the east and south of Britain. These established trade routes were the framework for the advance of the Roman army in Gaul and in Britain. And as it advanced through Gaul in the second half of the 1st century BC, the Roman army created a network of roads, while at the same time the Gauls were massively expanding their use of the rivers for the trade in bulk commodities, which you see on the right. By the end of that century, Gaul was well and truly open for business. As armies advance and incorporate new territories into an empire, the presence of military outposts triggers the rapid expansion of providers of services and suppliers of key goods such as foodstuffs, timber, and leather in the new territory. As the existing population adapts to the system of Roman commerce and develops a taste for Roman goods, they in turn will develop businesses and then look for new outlets and opportunities, which will usually lie in the direction of the travel of the conquering army. And so this effect ripples outwards, following on the heels of the conquering army. When the Roman army appeared in a conquered place and established a new base, they would have brought with them a small number of key workers, such as stonemasons and blacksmiths, but it would fall to them to acquire local apprentices and train them up. And this was a particular issue in the case of masons, as north of a certain point in Gaul, there was no pre-existing tradition of building in stone. The local architecture was in timber. Many men were trained as stonemasons in Gaul, and the children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren of those artisans would have been the masons traveling northwest on Watling Street to provide the workforce for major projects like the building of the new town of Wroxeter. I need to make it clear that I'm not suggesting that all the masons and craftsmen who ever worked at Wroxeter were from Gaul, or even from southeast Britain. We have clear evidence of masons and artisans working at Wroxeter who came from other parts of the Roman Empire. On the left here, we have one of the few architectural pieces from the fort period, a statue of a water nymph, complete with water pumping through the vase that was perched on her hip, a common subject in classical art. And this would certainly have been the central feature of a fountain in the garden of the legionary commander's private residence, and was clearly made by a mason from Italy. The other entirely classical carved stone here, my personal favorite, is a bit later and dates to the civilian period. This apotropaic stone depicts a winged phallus with legs pulling a cart of baby phalluses. It is definitely strange, but surprising, eye-catching images like this were often placed at crossroads to protect people against what you couldn't see coming for you around the corner. This one has been described as good as any of the many examples of this kind of thing found at Pompeii, and would certainly have been carved by a stonemason from Italy. A Gallic object type, but this time from the south of Gaul, is this carved stone trophy head on the left. This was found in the temple of Bushfox's excavation. These objects, stone heads standing in for the actual heads that were taken in battle and displayed in a previous era, are found at temple sites in Provence, such as Entremont, where the other one on the right here comes from. And on both you can see the eyes closed in death and the fingers holding the head up by the hair. In conclusion, I want to say that while Wroxeter's population in the 2nd century, the heyday of the new town, did not consist principally of people from northeast Gaul, they were there and there in key roles. These were the people who were at the center of commercial life and trades, who brought imported goods and manufacturing techniques to a new city in a region with no previous contact with Rome and no tradition of consumerism. In the map on the right, traders, entrepreneurs, and artisans from Gaul were in the central part of the city where business was being conducted. They were the people overseeing the building of the temples and other civic buildings and choosing and producing the imagery for public and sacred art. The rest of Wroxeter's population, in the big townhouses around the periphery with their lovely gardens, these were likely to have been the wealthy local landowners of the Cornovii tribe, who chose to live in the modern, secure town where they had access to all facilities and were well away from the peasantry out in the fields. But at Wroxeter, we do not see any indication that these locals brought their old religious beliefs with them. At the new town of Wroxeter, images of the sacred, such as these extremely popular figurines of Venus imported from central Gaul, are invariably images brought from the continent. Thank you very much for listening.
Well, thank you, Cameron. That really is fantastic. And for me, I know that site so well, but to hear things about it that I've never heard before. You know, I visit it for work and I've visited with my family. So it's great to get that extra depth of insight, really, into that fascinating history. So now it's over to you for your questions. And really, don't worry if you haven't sent them in yet. There's plenty of time. Please send them in right now. Keep them coming in. But I'll kick off with some of the ones that we've had in already, Cameron. So we're going to start with a question from Gloria, an interesting one that takes the topic a bit broader. are there any plans to excavate the wider area surrounding the Wroxeter site?
In short, no. Though, to go into it in a bit of detail, the economics of excavation are really daunting. And so the approach of English Heritage has been very much to protect the entirety of the monument at Wroxeter. Everything within the defences is under legal protection. And for the time being, I think unless there is some really pressing research question that can only be answered by excavation, I think we are going to stick in the main with the geophysical survey, where you're not damaging anything in the survey. Yeah.
So we keep it in the ground is keeping it safe. Excellent, but a really good question. Okay, another one here from Mike and Barbara. So your focus tonight has been on the links to the Gaulish province. Is there similar evidence at Wroxeter for trading with further flung places in the Roman Empire, such as Hispania or even Germania?
I am not aware of those particular provinces, but there is extensive evidence, certainly in the 2nd century, of the trade with the core areas of the Roman Empire, the trade with Italy, and tapping into their trading connections with places further east. And so those are the sources of the gemstone beads that we saw in one of the illustrations. Right, gotcha.
And of course, one of the great things with archaeology is that we base it all on the evidence. So new evidence could come to light which can possibly change that story, right?
Absolutely, yes. Yeah.
Fantastic. Great question. So one here on the Gaulish craftsmen themselves. Were the craftsmen in Wroxeter entrepreneurial kind of self-starters going out there looking for work? Or is it likely that they could have been coerced or brought in by the Roman army or the sort of Roman bureaucracy?
They could have been. There could have been incentives. I don't know about enforcement, but my opinion is that it is the former. And I think that you can look at many Romano-British sites and you can see this same kind of evidence of people fetching up in the central business district and just kicking off.
So do you think that might have something to do with this idea that with the stability, perhaps, that the Roman sort of infrastructure might have brought, people saw markets opening up and saw opportunities that they were willing to travel some great distances to exploit?
Absolutely, because the markets behind you, they are satisfied. You need to find new markets, and you need to go beyond where the Roman army has got to at that point. You need to be looking outwards.
There's a lot of parallels, I think, with today, aren't there? This idea of new markets expanding and diversifying.
Very much
we see it all the time. Yeah. But a really interesting question, actually, and great to make that link across almost 2,000 years. So from John, we've got, at the beginning of your talk, you mentioned that the Roman occupation of Wroxeter relocated to Chester. If that happened, why did it happen? And what was the problem with the Wroxeter site?
There wasn't a problem. It was simply that it had done what it was there for. The legion, in order to continue the conquest, it needed to move on to the new boundaries, the new edges of the empire. Okay, yeah. It was always a mission-driven occupation in that sense. Yes. Right, fantastic. Okay. Oh, right. Here we go. How big was the strip house? There's a lot of mention of strip houses. Oh, how big was the strip house? We'll hold you to the nearest yard, Cameron. I mean, they were quite narrow, and they went a long way into the depth of the property. You may have to find one of those plans and scale it off. Okay, yeah, no problem. But they were substantial. You're talking perhaps like 30 metres as opposed to 5 or 10. Yeah, well, let's say maybe 5 or 6 wide and 30 metres long, and you can see that the zoning is, into the back of the property, where the back has been divided up into multiple chambers for accommodation. So they are big enough to have a number of rooms at the back. And the archaeological evidence gives us enough of that ground plan for us to really begin to make that kind of level of detailed
sort of analysis of what's going on there.
Absolutely. Even with this excavation, which is more than a century old now, there is enough to get a very good understanding of how the interiors of these buildings were used.
You see, that's really interesting as well. It's another feature that I think you and I often find within an archaeological context, is that sometimes the work undertaken, as you say, a century or sometimes more ago, we can look at it again, and when it's been well recorded, it still gives back, doesn't it?
Yes, we excavate things anew, but we also need to go and re-excavate these older archives.
Yeah, so we're excavating the archive as opposed to excavating the site. Keep your hands clean, I guess, in that respect. Okay, next one from Jennifer. At the new museum, are there interactive displays and activities for young children so that we can really try and engage them? Let's have a look. If you book onto a visit at Rest Park to see the stores, will I see items from Wroxeter, or is it just whatever they're working on that you get to see? So will I see items from other sites? So 2 questions there.
The new museum at Wroxeter was designed with children in mind. Though that's not to put adults off whatsoever. And one of the reasons, other than wanting to bring everyone there, is that Wroxeter has a fantastic education program. We have unbelievable numbers of school parties going there. I think there is not a day of the week when there's not 1, if not 2 school visits.
Yeah.
And so it was designed with that audience in mind.
Yeah.
Going to Rest. If you go on a store tour at Rest, you will see Wroxeter. What you will see is the monumental architecture, which is out on open display in the store. Whether you will see any of the smaller items, well, yes, it does vary on the day, but it is more about the monumental material that is up on the racking, the industrial racking.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's worth saying, isn't it, that there's so much material at Rest Park that you could get to see bits from many sites from around England.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Fantastic. Okay. Oh, right. This is an interesting one from Ian. So, what do we know about the climate of Wroxeter in its heyday? And I'll give you a bit of an out here. You don't have to worry about the weather report at Wroxeter at a given time. Perhaps the climate of Britain, maybe in the Roman period. Do you think that was substantially different?
I don't think it was substantially different to what it is now. I mean, it is now, as it has always been, an area of grazing, and that was the basis of the economy. And no, I don't think I can really contribute anything more to that.
Yeah, no, of course. Right, has there been, this is from Sam, thank you, Sam, has there been a graveyard found outside the city? And if so, has any analysis been carried out on the skeletons to indicate those people's origins? A really interesting question, because that question gives away somebody who's clearly got an understanding of what is possible with human remains. So over to you.
There are multiple cemeteries outside the defensive circuit around Wroxeter. There have not been any modern excavations of those cemeteries. There have been some, I'm going to say maybe the end of the 18th century into the 19th century, there was some scavenging. Okay. English heritage does not hold large amounts of human remains for Wroxeter. I have heard recently that the museum in Shrewsbury, they have some human remains which I believe have gone for DNA analysis, but I have not heard the results yet.
Okay, so it's a case of watch this space as
really.
Oh,
yes,
right. So there could be some really interesting results that come up there, I guess.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Okay. A tricky one here. From Pauline, was slave labour used in Wroxeter in any way?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I would estimate that maybe 10% of the population was enslaved, and they would have been used in people's households. The town council would have owned their own slaves to run the enormous bathing complex. They were foundational in Wroxeter and any Roman place.
It's a really tricky aspect, isn't it? Because of course, for today, that is absolutely it's abhorrent, isn't it? But as you're saying, it's difficult to look at almost any Roman town or Roman settlement that would not have slaves really as a fundamental part of it.
Yep. Yeah, very important to the economy.
Yeah. So very tricky, but it's there nonetheless. Mm-hmm. Okay, from Michael, they're coming in thick and fast, I have to say. It's great. From Michael, is there a plan to display all the artefacts held in Shrewsbury Museum at Wroxeter? Where was the Roman mirror kept there, and where was it found within the city of Wroxeter?
Right. The reason why the collection is displayed in these two bodies, these two different organizations, is because it's a split collection. The site was taken into guardianship in, I believe, 1947. And so archaeological material from excavations before that date generally went to the local museum, which is in Shrewsbury, though not everything. Because when the local museum came to take what they wanted for their new museum, which was planned to display the material from excavations in, you know, the sort of 1910s and then the either side of the First World War. They didn't take everything. So they left a lot of material on the site, and that material eventually came with the site into the care of English Heritage. So those will always be split collections. The mirror came from... So the mirror is not ours. It is the Shrewsbury Museum's, and I think it was found, you know, it was found somewhere in the centre. It had been tucked into an underground space, as far as I recall.
It had been deliberately deposited
I think it had
for collection later?
I think it had been hidden, yes.
Yeah, okay. And unfortunately, they never made it back.
Yes, I mean, it is a spectacular thing, and you know, I couldn't have put a photograph in because it's not ours.
Yeah, no, of course. Okay, so from Tim, how navigable were the local rivers?
Well, that is a really interesting question. The local river, the Severn, goes right by the site. It was navigable at that date, but they seem not to have made a terrific amount of use of it. So as far as we can see, for example, the vast amounts of building stone required to build the civic centre, they were not being transported there by river. They were coming on the roads.
Really?
So it is one of these perplexing questions about Wroxeter. Why didn't they do more with the river? I don't know.
Oh, fascinating. Okay, yeah. Another one about strip houses. Why strips and not squares?
Strips and not squares, because it gives more people the premises facing directly onto Watling Street, which is where all the traffic is going. So you want to fit as many businesses as possible, but then they have a long tail so that you can fit in also your working area and then your accommodation.
Great. So it's a more effective use of space within the town planning.
Yes,
yes. So it is town planning. Well, that's what you're looking at there. Absolutely.
Yes.
It's town planning to maximise economic benefit.
Yes.
Yeah. Fantastic. Okay. From John. Many Roman settlements grew into the cities that we have across England. Absolutely. Why didn't this happen to Wroxeter?
That is another very interesting question. I think where it all went wrong for Wroxeter was that it didn't have stone walls. So when they created the defensive circuit around Wroxeter, it includes an enormous area. What is like 78 hectares?
Yes, on that scale.
Something like that, yes. So when things started to get difficult in the 4th century...
By difficult, we mean...
law and order is kind of breaking down, and there are bandits in the countryside, and people are buying in military forces to militia.
Yeah.
And the population is reducing. And I think all these things together just made it... they could never have defended it. They could never have defended that particular site. And it was a long way from everything else, long way from other big Roman cities. And you know, I think they just had to cut their losses and go.
But it's that idea. But I suppose there is something. Of course, there's something monumental about stone walls, and they last, don't they? They can last hundreds of years. We see it all around us. But without that, it ceases to be a defensible site in a difficult time. Fascinating. So quite a simple reason, but actually, you know, it had a profound effect on the life of the city.
Oh, and I did. I think I have an article, a web article, on the English Heritage website about the end of Roman Britain, which will answer some of these questions if you want to seek it out.
There you go. Right, Cameron's good. So right there you go. Have a look on the property page for Wroxeter, and you'll find further information on that one. So yeah, fantastic. Well done. So this one from Chris. On the point of excavations, I understand that the costs might be an issue, but isn't there a risk with climate change that the buried structures and objects may not truly be protected for posterity by being left protected under the soil?
Well, it is high enough above the river where the flooding never gets to the Roman remains. I don't think we have ever asked ourselves that question. We may want to go away and think about that.
Well, I mean, I think it is something worth thinking about, isn't it? And we do see it. Of course, we see it elsewhere in the portfolio where there are properties that we know are impacted by sea level change and what have you. Absolutely, absolutely. But I suspect, you know, it is worth considering that. So yeah, a great question. So from Anne. Did Romans have gardens at the back of their houses to grow food and flowers? Or maybe the question could be to grow food or flowers, but maybe food and flowers.
They absolutely did.
What, flowers and food?
Yeah,
okay.
Flowers and food.
And how do we know that?
We have, in the research excavations of the last quarter of the last century, a lot of soil samples were taken. There was a lot of environmental archaeology done. But also, it is simply the norm. For a Roman or British person, a Roman person living in a big house with the grounds, you grow your own food, you have your beehives, you have your, you know, stalls for your cattle, and it's the normal thing.
And by environmental archaeology, you mean?
I mean pollen and that kind of seeds.
So they can actually get to understand the specific species that's being grown in a certain area?
Yes.
Right, fantastic. So you can categorically say flowers and food?
Yes.
Yeah, brilliant, excellent, there we go. Did Wroxeter, this is from Jean, did Wroxeter have a theatre like the one at St Albans?
Not that we know. Yeah, sadly, no.
Again, it's all about the evidence, right? We can't, you know, that one wouldn't be surprised to find one, but has one been found?
One has not been found.
There we go. Very diplomatic. Thank you. OK, we've got time for, I think, 3 or 4 more questions. So this one from Tristan. Aside from pottery, what other goods were being made in Wroxeter versus imported goods?
Made in Wroxeter, there's extensive. I mean, I showed the melon beads. There's extensive evidence for the production of you know, copper alloy brooches, things like that. I think we can assume that most of the jewelry, and there are vast amounts of jewelry, was being made locally. There's certainly evidence for jewelry workers, you know, on the site.
Okay.
So in a way, it's interesting the needs and the demands created by Rome in terms of bling. It is then that need is being satisfied at the site. People come and they are making the things that they know that people want to buy.
Would there be, my own follow-on question here, is there anything detectable, such as like a Wroxeter style? Or are the styles pretty comparable across other sites within Roman Britain?
There are definitely local styles. I'm not sure there's anything you would say, that's a Wroxeter, but you would definitely say that's a Severn Valley brooch.
And
for the ceramics as well. Severn Valley style, big industry.
Yeah, fantastic.
And I think that relates to somebody asked about was it local clay? Were these things being made locally? Except for the imported Samian bowls, this was all absolutely local, being made, you know, within a couple of miles of the city centre.
Right, fantastic, thanks. OK, quick one here about any inscriptions, and do we have any evidence of the names of inhabitants?
There are military gravestones which give some names of some of the soldiers, but I'm really talking about the period that comes after the civilian development. And no, I don't think we do have any names for people.
There are inscriptions, but possibly not of personal names of non-military individuals.
Yes, it's the military that is the, you know, if you're military, you might well have your name on something. The civilian population, because, you know, there may be things in the cemeteries, but we're going to leave them
still there,
nice and safe for the time being.
Protected,
yes,
we hope. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. OK, so this is second to last one from Michael. Which quarry or quarries was the stone brought from to Wroxeter?
They were all local. There are at least 3 different sources, and they are all within say a 10 or 15 mile radius.
You don't want to be carrying that stuff long distances, do you?
No, you don't. No. And you don't need to. There are, you know, good supplies of building stone in Shropshire.
Yeah, fantastic.
Yeah.
OK, right, our last question. This is from Janet, so thank you, Janet. Why didn't the Romans establish the fort inside a defensive meander loop of the river?
Oh, I wonder if you are thinking about the site of nearby Shrewsbury. I think they wanted a big open space. Mm-hmm. And where Wroxeter is sited, it's right near a river crossing. There was probably a bridge. I think it's a space thing. They wanted as much space as they could get their hands on. And it may be relevant that there is a hill fort immediately adjacent, the Wrekin, where there was an Iron Age population, and there's archaeological evidence of there having been a battle at the time of the invasion. And it looks directly down onto Wroxeter. So it could have been a statement.
OK.
In part.
Yeah,
Yes.
Absolutely. OK,
It's good land, nice flat building site. It ticked their boxes.
Yeah, OK, fantastic. Well, I'm afraid that's all we've got time for tonight. So thank you, Cameron, both for a fantastic lecture and also some really stimulating questions and some great responses.
Great questions.
Yeah, they were, really. So thank you so much for joining us tonight. We'll be sending you all a link with a really short survey to get your thoughts on the lectures as a whole and to find out any topics that you might be particularly interested to hear about in the future. It will only take a few minutes, and we'd really appreciate it if you could take the time to fill that in. So thank you in advance for those who do. So we're going to be back on the 18th of December, very close to Christmas, with a lecture about connecting with castles. I'll leave that hanging so you can imagine all sorts of things there. And in the meantime, all of these lectures are going to be available for you to watch again in the members area of the website. Thanks once again to Cameron for such a fantastic lecture, and thank you to all of you, our wonderful members. It's only thanks to your support that we're able to care for all the sites, the collections, the landscapes that are in our care, and for us to be able to share the amazing stories that come out of these places and these fantastic, often very enigmatic objects. And I'd like to say an extra special thank you to those of you who donated during the lecture tonight. Now, all of you as members, you all make a positive difference, but I'd like to say thank you very much to those of you who contributed this evening. So that's all from me. Thanks again to Cameron, and thank you as our members, and good night.